Hello Computer Graphics 1 class, this is Professor Homa, and I'm going to review the apple that we worked on in class. And this is the one that we used both a unite, an intersect, and a minus front Pathfinder filter to make this very simple apple over here. So this is kind of the finished product, and I'll just review the steps that we did in class to make this apple. Three parts of it: the body of the apple, the leaf, and the stem, and they're all constructed out of ovals. So I'm going to start with my oval tool, and I'm going to draw a taller kind of egg-shaped oval just by dragging in a 45-degree angle. And then after I draw that, I'm going to go back to my selection tool. I'm going to put my mouse on the outside of the corner and just rotate slightly, not quite 45 degrees, maybe 15 degrees or so, just so it has a slight angle to it. And I'm going to make a copy of this to have kind of this shape over here. I'm going to make a copy of this, but instead of option dragging like I usually do, I'm going to double click on the reflect tool. Now over here in the toolbox that you'll see is the reflect tool. Now if you don't see it, it may be underneath, and I don't mean below, I mean underneath the rotate tool, and you may have to hold on to that black triangle on the bottom corner there to get out the reflect tool. So I'm going to select the reflect tool, and then I'm just going to double click on it in the palette while my object is still selected. And what happens is I have the options of how to reflect it, and if I reflect, I'll move this over, if I reflect around the vertical axis, it's going to flip it this way, and if I reflect on a horizontal axis, it would flip it this way. So we're going to flip it on the vertical axis, almost like on a flagpole, 90 degrees. That should come up as default, and I'm going to hit my copy button. So when I do that, it makes a second copy, and before I try to grab it, I got to go back to my selection tool, move it over, and I'm going to move it over a little bit just so I have a little bit of a dip here and a little bit of dip here. I could even use my arrow keys on my keyboard, and I could even align these objects by selecting them both and using my align options up on the control palette, vertical, align, center, just to get them up and down aligned. Now here's where the Pathfinder comes in. I'm going to select both of these shapes, and you can see they overlap, and I'm going to use my Pathfinder, and here in my Pathfinder palette I have three choices that we're going to be using for this exercise: unite, minus front, and intersect. We're going to use unite, which is going to combine these two shapes into one shape. So I'm going to hit unite, and you can see it remove the overlap, and I have one shape there. The next operation I'm going to use is going to be a minus front, which will create this bite of the apple. But before I do that, I'm going to draw another oval or a circle shape. I'll draw it just by dragging with my ellipse tool, and then I'm going to take my selection tool and overlap about where I want the bite to be. And that's about where I want my bite to be, so I'll highlight both shapes. And this time, when I go down to my Pathfinder palette, I'm going to select the minus front tool, or the minus front operation. And by clicking this, it'll select those two shapes, and the top shape will subtract, or will cut out of the bottom shape as well as itself. And it'll only be left with an empty space. So if I select minus front, it takes it away, and it almost cookie cuts and makes a little bite out of that apple. And now that I have a bite out of the apple, I could go to my gradient palette. I'm going to give it a gradient, and I do have a red and white gradient already here from the last time that I did it, but you could just choose radial gradient, and there it's using the red and white. If you had black and white, if you use that and then just change this one to red, you get a red and white gradient. But if you want the highlight to be in the upper left corner like that sample, you could just use your gradient tool, go up here in the upper left, and just drag. And there's my body of my apple. Next thing I'm going to do is the leaf, which we're going to use the intersect, and I'm going to make my colors back to white and black again. I'm going to undo that, not on this, I'll deselect this, but I'll make my default colors white and black, and I'll just make two circles together. There's one, and then I'm going to hold my option key down and make a second. And when I do this, I'll have to select both of these so you can see what I mean, but right here, this shape is the intersection, kind of like the MasterCard symbol. I'm actually going to use this shape as the intersection of these two shapes, and that's what I'm going to be left with. So the intersect Pathfinder will just take where they intersect, and everything else will be deleted. So with these two shapes selected, I'm going to go to my Pathfinder. I'm going to select intersect, and it'll leave this leaf kind of shape. I'll fill it with a green color, and if you want to use a gradient, I'll use a radial gradient, and it'll jump to this red and white gradient color. But one end I'll make it kind of a dark green, and I'll go to the other end and make it a little bit of a lighter green. And I'll take my gradient tool and just kind of start it from this end. That way when I rotate it, it'll have a little highlight there. I'll rotate it, move it into place over here, and if it looks a little large, I'll just grab a corner and scale it down a little. So there's my leaf. And the last thing we'll do is make a stem. So again, this shape was made by uniting those two ovals, and then we took another circle and put it on this other shape after it was united, and we did a minus front, which took a bite out of it. And then this leaf was created out of an intersect Pathfinder. Our very last one, we're going to use minus front to just create this stem shape. And I'm just going to use a rectangle, and I'll make it, well, I'll make it default color right now so we can see what we're doing. But I'm just going to put two ovals on either side that'll kind of like bevel in and give it a tapered in kind of shape. And there's different ways to make a stem, but we'll just do that for now. So I'm going to take my ellipse tool and kind of do it on one side, and then I'm going to copy this same ellipse or oval that I used over here to kind of get it like a mirror image. And what I'm going to be looking for is this shape in the middle. You might say, well, isn't that the intersection? No, it's not the intersection of these two shapes. I'm actually using two separate shapes that will do a minus front of this rectangle. So these, I could use two things. I don't just have to use one. These two shapes will do a minus front because they're on top of the rectangle. So I'll highlight all three, and I'll use my Pathfinder, and I'll use my minus front, and I'm left with this kind of tapered in shape. If I want to go to my swatches, I could color it brown, and I can make it I could make it narrower by squeezing it in. I could scale it down, make it a lot smaller, and I'll put it over my apple, and maybe I'll rotate it a little bit like the other one. And if I want it to go in the back, so I don't really have a nice like indentation or shadow part where it would go into the apple. So I'm just going to put it behind everything. I'll do Object, Arrange, Send to Back. You can also do this by right-clicking on the object itself, or you could use the Object menu. And I'll do Send to Back. And there's my finished apple. Again, this was using minus front. The leaf was using intersect, and the apple was used by first using unite and then using minus front to take the bite out of it. So that's our little apple lesson that we did in class.